I'm here today with Tara Courchaine, Michelle Soriano, and Kelli Suding of CAST. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate your time. And I wonder, just to start, could you introduce yourselves and your roles at CAST?
Sure. I'm Tara Courchaine. I'm the Chief Research and Development Officer at CAST. Been at CAST for a little over 2 years, and I oversee all of our federally funded K 12 research work.
Hi, and I'm Michelle Soriano, and I am one of our technical assistance specialists at CAST. I support both the National Center on Accessible Educational Materials and the Site Center.
Hi, and I'm Kelli Suding. I'm also one of the technical assistant specialists at CAST, supporting the National Center on Accessible Educational Materials, or AIM, and sites.
Wonderful. So, at ELA, the Educating All Learners Alliance, we focus a lot on accessibility within education, inclusive education, and I know that you do too. Could you tell us a little bit about how inclusive technology kind of breaks down the barriers for students who have learning disabilities?
Absolutely. Well, inclusive technology really ties into our belief at CAST around universal design for learning. And we really feel that when instruction and technology is inclusive, kids can be successful in the general education classroom together. So kids that do have differing abilities or needs, when they have technology that is accessible for them, such as text to speech or speech to text, it really works so that they don't need something different. They don't need to wait longer to get what they need. They're not using a different device. They're all working together in a community so that they can have a sense of not just inclusion but belonging.
Belonging. Yeah, that's interesting.
So when we think about inclusive technology as well, it's really about choice built in to the technology. So when we're talking about universal design for learning, it's choice built into the environment. But when we think about inclusive technology, it's an option that all of our students can have when they're in the classroom. So it's like Tara alluded to, so then our students don't look like they feel different. So
Mm,
then we have the students who need what is assistive technology, which means they actually need that type of like text to speech or speech to text to be successful in the classroom. So just
mm,
thinking about the choice is already built into the environment. And then it's really not an afterthought. We're not retrofitting
sure.
the technology like, oh my gosh, I have to get a third party app or a third party software for my students to be able to access,
Sure.
decode, and engage in the content. So it's really important to always think about inclusion always in the forefront.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that idea of belonging, and there really is a difference between someone being welcome and someone belonging there, and I think it might be what you said, the idea of that choice being built in already for them. There's no thought and accommodation that needs to be made on the fly, anything like that.
Yeah, and even to push that even further, belonging. And it's also there's a difference between being entertained by the technology and being engaged in the technology.
Oh,
So that's
interesting.
really what inclusive technology can support. There are a
Yeah.
lot of fun, and like we learn through play, and that's really important. But when it comes to actually engaging in the content, that's kind of pushing more toward that inclusive.
I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that idea of learning through play.
Oh, yeah, learning through play. I think even at CAST, even during our own meetings, we're doing things where there's activities where it's like really fun and we're seeing it like in playing. And sometimes it's also not only entertaining, but we're engaged. That's how we learn things without even really knowing, because some of our students will be resistant when it feels like another thing they have to do. Unless, like, we can talk about worksheets, right?
Mm,
You hand a student a worksheet with a learning disability, they cannot engage and interact with that content because the barrier is decoding, so they only have access to that worksheet. And so when we think about play, instead of having those worksheets, having activities where we're standing up, we're thinking about multisensory opportunities through that play.
mm.
And that's how we learn. You think of early childhood, preschool, babies, they're learning through that play, like touching and feeling. And so I think just because our students get older, even as adults, we don't lose that.
Hmm.
That's why when we present together at CAST, come to our sessions, because we're like, hey, dance parties, all of those things to really engage the brain so we can be successful and we can also learn. And we have to take those moments of play to be able to really reset our brains to be able to engage into the lesson.
Kelly, that makes me think of just one other thing I want to mention is a lot of the research shows that we learn the best when we're curious,
Mm.
and through play and through exploring is where our curiosity is sparked. So that's really a critical piece too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I imagine that just thinking about it from what you described, that you know, plays really has to be sort of an intuitive thing. So to have all these barriers between you and what you're learning is it's going to, I guess, decrease the enjoyment of it, but just the intuitive nature of it and the play of it.
Well, and I think something that really increases those barriers is when we're not proactive in thinking about that design. And so when we're really designing ways, whether it's play, whether it's engagement through multiple means, we really have to be proactive in thinking about all of our kiddos' needs, really thinking about the technology that we're bringing in. Is it truly inclusive? Are we trying to retrofit it, or are we
Mm,
really considering that from the beginning?
sure.
Because that's what's going to help decrease those barriers in everything that our students do.
Yes, and we're just going to keep on adding here. It
Yeah,
reminds me of
please.
an experience. Yeah. It reminds me of an experience one time co-teaching with a sixth grade teacher. And so I was in special education. This was a gen ed teacher. And so we brought in some technology. The school didn't really, it wasn't one-to-one technology. So they brought in technology. And then the gen ed teacher had this activity, and I can't remember, it was like a quiz activity on the iPads. And so it was really great. But the thing is that was missing was the kids were really excited. So they're all in this big group looking at this technology, doing these quizzes, and they were just like having a blast. Okay. Like having a blast. You had to answer questions in a certain amount of time. I remember the superintendent came in and said, "Oh my gosh, look at all these students are engaged." And I said, "I hear what you're saying. Some of our students are not because we're
Mm,
not considering the processing time of having those time quizzes. So they're just back sort of like cheering on their peers
sure.
when in fact the processing time was not considered. So for those
Interesting. Yeah.
students, they're not going to say, "I'm sorry, I can't answer it quick enough." They just sit back. And so they're more passive in their own education. So inclusive
Mm,
technology is thinking about all the activities so all of our students can be engaged and not just participating passively. We want all of our students to take charge of their own learning, and those opportunities are thinking about the design with universal design for learning and those inclusive technologies.
yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier this idea of making sure that students are engaged through technology, not just entertained by it. So what are some changes that you would like to see more that ed tech vendors can make to make their technology and their products more accessible and inclusive
Yeah, I think a big part is having people who use assistive technology in the whole process.
within the design
Within the
process?
design process and not thinking after it's been designed. So we think, "Oh my gosh, this is a really cool tool." And then you think we have a user who uses, let's just say, a screen reader. And all of a sudden, the screen reader can get to the question, but then they can't get to the options or the game itself.
Sure.
Or it's provided by the screen reader can't access the images. And maybe it's a game that is really reliant on visuals.
Uh-huh.
And so we have to think, is there alt text in there? How's the screen reader actually going to be able to start, from the start to the finish? And we always say at CAST, accessibility should be the start to the finish. And it's not extra steps, it's just steps that you've missed. And so what I really hope is that ed tech vendors keep that in mind and always have those users with disabilities on the boards and in the conversations, especially when it comes to, because a big part is procurement. When we have states and districts who are wanting to use these softwares and discover that they're not accessible. I mean, it's those things aren't going to be purchased. So just keeping that in mind, like
Yeah,
accessibility from the start to the finish, and have those users involved in the conversations as well.
sure.
And I also think that it's really important. And one thing that I really wish we can move beyond, and it's something I had to learn as an educator as well, is that sometimes those things that you think that's cute and it's fun and it's, oh, they will love this, or, oh, this is going to really look awesome in my classroom,
Mhm.
it's not accessible. And if it's not accessible, then our students aren't going to benefit from it. And they're not going to get and reap the outcomes that we're hoping for. And so when we're thinking about it, especially from a vendor standpoint, when they're designing things to accommodate the curriculum or the books that people are purchasing, making sure that it's not a drag and drop if it's not accessible, right? Because screen readers cannot use that. Things that are activities that are built in, embedding choice, but choice that everybody has the option to
Mm,
engage in any single activity that's on there.
sure.
Because our schools are purchasing and they're spending a lot of funds to purchase these things, and they're getting them, and you don't know what you don't know until you know it. And when you get it and it's not accessible,
Mhm.
boom, we've just spent a whole lot of money
Right.
for things that our students cannot engage with.
Wow. Yeah.
Building upon that, oftentimes when schools purchase those technologies, and then they, ed tech, the developers may like haven't been really thinking about accessibility. So then what happens is we try to retrofit. We're getting accessible overlays over the actual software or the technology, which
Sure.
ends up becoming the barrier. So
Mhm.
really thinking about the skill sets. I loved how you said drag and drop. We think about that on the iPad. There's a lot of drag and drop, but students don't have those skill sets sometimes to even do that. Maybe it's mobility. So just keeping all of that in mind.
Yeah. It's interesting. We've kind of been talking about it from the ed tech vendor side, and you mentioned the perspective of the educator themselves. And um, I wonder if you were to give a quick tip to teachers listening who are looking at inclusive technology for inclusive technology, what would you